everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today I am going to compare and review and then dye 6 different skeins of 75% Superwash Merino, 25% nylon sock yarn. These are 6 different lines of yarn across 3 different brands. We'll talk about the yardage, the price point, and the yarn itself. Now, I hypothesize that all 6 of these skeins are going to take up dye in a very, very similar way. And ultimately, it will come down to personal preference and where you prefer to shop. Before we go any further, I want to give some disclosures. I am an affiliate marketer with both KnitPicks and Dyer Supplier, and that means I do earn commissions off of sales that I refer through affiliate links that I often have clearly marked in my video descriptions. I buy all of the KnitPicks yarn I use myself, and Dyer Supplier has sent me some yarn for free to play with in the past, and I have a relationship with some of the team over there. Wool2Dye4, I really just have a relationship of that as a customer. I have a wholesale account and make orders that I like to unbox for fun. Here are the 6 yarn bases that we're playing with. KnitPicks Stroll, Felici, Muse, Dyer Supplier 7525, and then Wool2Dye4 Platinum Sock, and then Sheila's Titanium. There are a lot of similarities between these bases, but one big difference right off the bat is the way that they arrive when you order them. KnitPicks is primarily a retail company sending their products directly to consumers. And as such, all of the yarn always comes individually labeled. With Stroll and Felici, we have these ball bands, and then there's a hang tag on Muse. The 3 yarns all come from different mills in different countries, and so I'll talk about that in a little bit. But whether you buy a 20-pack or an individual skein, they will each be labeled. The yarn from Dyer Supplier and Wool2Dye4 comes in bags, and they are not individually labeled. Single skein samples are available from both Dyer Supplier and Wool2Dye4. The Wool2Dye4 samples come with a hang tag and twisted, sort of like this. I'm not sure because I haven't ordered a single skein sample from Dyer Supplier, but I imagine they come twisted and maybe in a bag. I'm not 100% sure though. But here's a brief example of the bag of Platinum Sock from Wool2Dye4. All of these skeins obviously have the same fiber content, and the yardage is pretty close. They're all fingering weight sock yarns, and the yardage does range between approximately 415 yards to 463 yards per 100 grams. As for the retail pricing, the cost per 100 grams varies from about $8.05 through $12.99. But again, there are either bulk or wholesale prices available through these different websites. What's the minimum number that you need to purchase? With KnitPicks, you can order single skeins, as many as you like, or the bags of 20. Dyer Supplier has some single skein samples available, but otherwise you should purchase them as bags of 5. Wool2Dye4, again, there's samples available for wholesale customers, and I think that if you're a retail customer, you might be able to reach out and ask to buy a sample, but those are intended for 1 per customer. Otherwise, you buy the yarn in bags of 10 skeins. As for bulk discounts, KnitPicks offers a discount when you buy a bag of 20 skeins, and that's available to all retail customers. And you can apply for a wholesale account with Dyer Supplier and Wool2Dye4. Wool2Dye4 requires that you are a registered business. Dyer Supplier, you can either be a registered business or they have some other requirements, but you should visit either the Wool2Dye4 or Dyer Supplier website for full details on how to create a wholesale account. The wholesale account at Wool2Dye4 is a flat discount, but you do have to purchase a minimum of 5 kilograms, which is 50 skeins of yarn. The Dyer Supplier wholesale account has a buy more, save more plan where you get tiered discounts the more you purchase. Before I go and look at each skein closer, more individually, let's talk about shipping. Both KnitPicks and Dyer Supplier offer free shipping on a minimum purchase. With KnitPicks, if you spend $65 in the US, you can get free shipping. With Dyer Supplier, you can get free shipping in the US when you have a $175 purchase. Free shipping is never actually free, but what these companies are effectively doing is giving another bulk discount to you. If you buy enough yarn, they'll cover the shipping costs, which gives you more of a discount on the yarn itself. At Wool2Dye4, you pay the actual cost of shipping. And as I mentioned before, in order to get the wholesale pricing, you have to order at least 50 skeins of yarn or 5 kilograms. In my most recent Wool2Dye4 purchase, which I believe was over 5 kilograms, I paid $16.20 for shipping, which, if there were only 50 skeins in there, is a cost of about 32 cents per skein. I'm really only bringing this up because it does factor into the cost per skein, which ultimately I think is a big reason why you might prefer to go shop with one company versus another. But at the same time, the prices I'm listing here are the full price retail prices and aren't accounting for any sales or discounts that the companies offer. Let's talk about the KnitPicks yarn. The 3 yarn bases have a different price point: $8.99, $9.99, and then $12.99 for Muse. Honestly, I was perplexed when Muse sock yarn came out because Muse, as the worsted weight yarn, is a beautiful single ply 100% superwash merino. And I was really excited because I thought that Muse would be that same single ply, and that would be so exciting. But nope, it is a 4-ply sock yarn. This wouldn't have been such a bummer, except Felici and Stroll are also 4-ply 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon sock yarns. The yardage does vary: 462, 436, and then 423. These 3 yarns are also all made at different mills. Stroll is milled in Peru, Felici in Italy, and Muse in Japan. The new Muse dyed colorway is beautiful, and I think that they offered the bare one to complement that line. So I can understand it from that retail perspective why they would include it, but as someone who mostly buys bare yarn from them at this stage, initially I was perplexed. A long time ago, I actually called KnitPicks customer service to ask about the difference between Stroll and Felici. The quality of merino in Felici is a tad bit higher, and the spin is a little tighter, which you can see from the fact that it is only 436 yards to the 462 in Stroll. And when you knit or dye with it, you can feel it. It's a little more bouncy, a little rounder, and the Stroll is, I guess, a little loftier. Ultimately, the Stroll versus Felici differences come down to the fact that they were made at different mills. But many people do prefer one over the other. I have not dyed the Muse yarn before, and I mean, there's less yardage, so it should be maybe a little tighter than Felici, but the strands look very similar. Like, Felici feels denser to me than Stroll, but I don't feel a huge difference between the Muse and Felici, but the Felici feels a little softer to me than the Muse, which is funny because the Muse is a lot more expensive. One other quick thing to note is that almost all of the 6 skeins that we're looking at today have a very similar bare color. The color on Felici is a hair deeper than the rest. I'm not sure if it's a hair more yellow or just a hair more saturated, but looking at them under slightly different lights, I think the Felici does feel a tad bit darker. I don't think this is a problem, it's just a slight difference between them. I'm not sure how much it shows up on camera, but the Dyer Supplier 7525 looks
different from the stroll. And I think it's because this yarn is only 3 ply. My experience dyeing the Dyer Supplier 7525 so far is that it fluffs up a lot with dyeing. And realizing now that it is only 3 ply, that must mean that each ply is slightly thicker than, say, stroll, and one reason why it looks slightly different. But Dyer Supplier estimates that the yarn is about 415 yards per 100 grams. And it is, I think, the only site that does say approximately when it's talking about the yardage. I'm going to profess some confusion right now because the bag that I have says it's 450 yards per 100 grams, but the website did say approximately 415. But as I said, the yardage does fluff up a bit once you dye it, and so maybe the 415 is to represent the yardage post dyeing. I'm going to go ahead and trust the website on this one. I believe that this is a skein that I was sent back when Dyer Supplier had first swapped to the new mill, and so it's possible that they've updated the yardage on the packaging since then. The Dyer Supplier 7525 is the least expensive of all the ones we are exploring today at $7.75 retail for one skein. Let's talk Wool2Dye4. The two 7525 lines are Platinum Sock and Sheila's Titanium. And the big difference is that the Platinum is a 4-ply sock yarn and the Titanium is 2-ply, which when I saw this really excited me. It feels so soft. I'm not sure why, because I think it's the same wool and everything. I've never dyed Sheila's Titanium before, but it feels so soft. And I'm not sure if the softness is because the 2 plies are a little thicker. It gives it a little more tactile feel because you can kind of feel and see those plies. I love 2-ply yarn, and I'm very excited to dye it for the first time in a little bit. Both of these yarns retail for $8.05 per 100 grams, and both of them also have 463 yards in 100 grams. Platinum Sock and KnitPicks Stroll are 100% dupes for one another. They're both 4-ply, they have nearly the same yardage. I have never used them together in one project, but they feel and look very similar to me after dyeing from my experience thus far. That's a lot of talking about their yarns, but I did want to break down the main differences, and a lot of the main differences really do come down to price. Feel-wise, my favorites might be the Titanium, Felici, but that's like by a hair because I like the way all of them feel and would recommend any of them. I'm now going to go add on a reusable nylon zip tie to each of them, label them 1 through 6 so we can keep them apart, and we're about to go kettle dye them in one color so that way we can compare them to one another after we have dyed the yarn. I would like to give a quick honorable mention to 2 7525 yarns that I decided to leave out of this comparison, and that is Lion Brand Sockies yarn and Patton's Croy sock yarn. These yarns are 75% superwash wool, 25% nylon, but in preparing this video I decided to leave out anything that wasn't merino wool just because there are a lot other 75% various breeds of wool, 25% nylon sock yarns out there. I have not yet dyed these, but I hope to in a future video. In theory, these are 2 yarn lines that you can find in big box retailers, but I was not able to find them there. I had to go and search and find them online. So they might be easier to find, but you also might not find them in your local store. One other quick comparison is the length of the skeins. And I'm going to try to do this again after we have dyed and dried the yarn, so that way we can crudely look for shrinking. To sort of control the differences, I will be measuring them like laid out like this next to each other at the end. But the Wool2Dye4 skeins are a little over 31 inches long. The Dyer Supplier is about 26 inches. So is the Muse. And so is Stroll. So Stroll, Muse, and Dyer Supplier 75-25 are about 26 inches long. And then Felici is only 21 inches long. In my 12-quart dedicated dye pot, one that I don't use for food, we have 24 cups of water. And I'm adding around another cup and a half of some dye that I just mixed. This dye had 1 gram of Dharma frozen and 9 grams of Dharma teal green. I pre-soaked all of the yarn for about an hour and then put it quickly through the spin dryer to remove that excess liquid. So the yarn is all damp, but not, you know, soaking. Because I didn't want to add too much volume to our pot. We're going for some semi-solid tonal yarns today, and there's no acid in here yet. We're doing not necessarily the cool vat technique, but this yarn all will start to absorb color pretty quickly, and I knew that if I just went in to all of this yarn with acid, the color would start striking as I added it. I'm not expecting that we're going to see a massive difference in here of the amount of color saturation between all of these, but I wanted to give it a bit of a shot so that way the color absorption wouldn't be completely uneven. And in fact, I think that we will add more volume here to the pot. We are now up to 32 cups of liquid here in the pot. More liquid won't change the color. The important thing is the total amount of dye, but it will allow the yarn to move and will allow more color to penetrate to more areas. I am now going to start adding some acid, and we're going to add half of a cup of white vinegar and then immediately come up and, quote, stir this. So the way I'm stirring the yarn is carefully raising it up, lowering it back down, and sort of repeating to just get that acid distributed through the dye pot. And now I am going to turn on the stove. We will be coming through and gently stirring occasionally, but otherwise the yarn is just going to be here to absorb the color, and I will be back in 30 minutes. It has been 30 minutes and the pot is definitely warm. I wouldn't say we're at anywhere near a boil or anything yet. A lot of color has absorbed. Here's a spoon where you can see that compared to where that deep color started, almost all of the color has absorbed. And I am so excited with this deep, deep teal. Okay, but I do want to leave the heat on for, I think, another 30 minutes. If we start getting to a boil, then I will reduce the heat to try to keep it a little bit below a simmer. Oh, beautiful, beautiful saturated color. I'm not sure if I can move all this aside so we can see down to the bottom. There's a lot of fiber in here. There could be a hint of color left. Like if I use the spoon, it seems clear, but if I move it aside, I don't know if you guys can see down to the bottom. I do see maybe a hint of color, but all things considered, the color is in our yarn. I'm going to leave it in here to cool completely so that way I can comfortably and easily remove it. And then once the yarn is cool, we'll go wash it. Now we are going to start washing our beautiful pigmented yarn. I'm not sure how big of a deal the frozen that I added made on the color, but you know, frozen's one of my favorite colors and I wanted to include it. I just added some clear dish soap to the yarn. I'm only washing 3 skeins at a time because in this little basin that I use for video purposes, it's hard to fit a lot more. But that water is looking really clear. So now I'm going to rinse out the soap, go put the yarn through my spin dryer, and hang it up to dry. And I'm going to do the same with the other 3 skeins off camera. Here is the finished yarn. Now, before I go through and measure the skeins, I want to pop up a picture of what they looked like laid out like this undyed to see if you can see one difference right away. And the difference that you can see is between these 2 skeins, the KnitPicks Muse and then the Dyer Supplier yarn. When I first laid it out, I measured them at about the same length, but the Muse actually looked like it was a tad bit shorter than the Dyer Supplier 7525. And the Dyer Supplier 7525 is now definitely shorter than the Muse. So it did shrink a bit. They all might have shrunk, but relative to the rest, I think that is the biggest difference that I see right now. All of the measurements that I have done are very, very approximate. But we definitely have shrinkage across the board. I would say the Wool2Dye4 Platinum and Titanium are now maybe about 27.5 inches when I measured them at 31 beforehand. Dyer Supplier is maybe at 22 when it was about 26. Got about 24 for the Stroll and the Muse. Those are both about 24 inches down from about 26. And then our Felici is about 20 down from 21. Now, is there actual shrinkage? Well, the yarns have like bounced back a bit, but they still might, as you're knitting, they might stretch and they can still block out probably to their original size. But I have definitely noticed in the past that the Dyer Supplier yarn does fluff up a lot through the dyeing process, and measuring them like this really does show it that it does compared to the others. But we did observe some shrinkage in all of them. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're planning the amount of yarn you need for a project. I think that when it comes to any hand-dyed yarn, it is important to realize that the yardage that is being reported is approximate. That's the yardage that's given from the manufacturer. I think most indie dyers don't go and measure the actual yardage. They tend to measure by weight. So there can be some variability in the actual length. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of the ChemKnits patrons for supporting the content here on the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. And I would like to give a shout out to Karen Siegel and the rest of the Fiber patrons. You'll see some of their names go across the screen right now. Thank you so much for all of your support. If you would like to learn how you could get a shout out in one of these videos, go and check out the ChemKnits Patreon. Patrons get early access to the Dyepot PS series. They can get behind the scenes sneak peeks, permanent Etsy shop coupons, and more. You can find a link to the Patreon in the video description and in the top right corner of this video in the iCard. Now let's think about color. We have this beautiful saturated deep teal. We used 9 grams of Dharma teal acid dye, so that would be about a 1.5% depth of shade, or DOS. And then I also added a gram of the frozen, which is just a fraction. I'm not sure if the frozen made an impact on the final color, but I just felt like making a mixture. The yarn is a semi-solid tonal, and so it's hard to say if one of them picked up more pigment than the other. I think it's fairly similar and could have something to do with where the yarn was located in the pot. The one that I would say stands out a little bit to me is the Felici. The color feels a little bit more muted, a little bit less bright than the other 5. And honestly, this could be because the yarn was a tiny bit more yellow, a little bit less white than the others were. Now, is it really that different? No. Can you kind of tell that it stands out? Sure. I mean, this would make a difference if you were gonna have, if you had the skein of Felici and the skein of Stroll and you wanted to knit both of them in one project, you might see like a line where you switch from one skein to the next. But fundamentally, with hand-dyed yarn, you could see that between 2 skeins, even if they're the same yarn base. So that's something to keep in mind. I do think that if we were dyeing 6 skeins of all the same colorway, kind of like we did in the ChemKnits Hanukkah special video, that we would end up with 6 skeins of a very, very similar color. So I wouldn't worry about that a ton. One other thing I should probably note is that I added the vinegar into the dye bath with the yarn in there. So the vinegar, some yarn had more access to the vinegar than others right off the bat. And that really could alter some of this pigment absorption that we're seeing. If I had removed all the yarn, set it aside, added the vinegar, and then added all the yarn back to the pot at the same time, I think that the overall colors could have been a little more even. And so here we have it, 6 skeins of 75% Superwash Merino, 25% nylon yarn that we dyed at the same time in the same dye pot. And really, these yarns are very, very similar to one another. And I think which one you should go for depends on where you want to order the yarn from, maybe your price point or how much bare yarn you want to order. But I'm a customer of all 3 companies, KnitPicks, Dyer Supplier, and Wool2Dye4. So fundamentally, I don't necessarily recommend one over the other. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I am an affiliate marketer with both KnitPicks and Dyer Supplier, and Dyer Supplier has sent me yarn for free in the past to review and put into my videos. And so I definitely want to make sure that that disclosure is fully clear to all of you. If you do want to learn more about any of these yarn bases, I have links. Some are affiliate links that are clearly marked, all in the video description. From KnitPicks, we have Stroll, Felici, and Muse. We have Dyer Supplier's 7525, and we have Wool2Dye4's Platinum Sock and Sheila's Titanium. When it comes to KnitPicks, I think that the one that I would be least likely to reorder is Muse. The yarn is pretty, it's soft, but it's a lot more expensive than Stroll. And I wouldn't call it felted, but it definitely fuzzed up and feels a little bit rougher than its counterparts. So in a heartbeat, if you're ordering from KnitPicks, I recommend Stroll and Felici. Especially since all 3 of these yarn bases from KnitPicks are 4-ply 75/25. So they are very, very similar. I think the one time I would order the Muse over the other 2 is if I was dealing with a different skein of Muse and one of those variegated skeins, then I wanted to dye something to coordinate with it, then I would pick that same yarn base. I love the way the 3-ply Dyer Supplier yarn plumps up with dyeing. I like that there's a little more definition in the plies themselves than in the KnitPicks yarns. It makes it feel a little bit different even though the fiber content is the same. And so if that kind of nature and visibility in the plies is something that you like, then this might be the one for you. Finally, when it comes to the Wool2Dye4 bases, I've ordered a lot of Platinum Sock because I love, love, love that I could get it in blanks, in mini and micro skeins, in 6-yard skeins, in 150 gram skeins. There's a lot of options with the same yarn base. But titanium, ooh, I love a 2-ply yarn, and look at that ply definition. That is just stunning. Which of these have I dyed the most of? Probably our 4-ply. Certainly Stroll, maybe followed by Platinum Sock, And then Felici and I think the Dyer Supplier are probably fairly evenly matched. Again, this is my first time ever dyeing the titanium and Muse, so I'm less familiar with those yarn bases and how they pick up dye and how they handle. But frankly, all of them are really, really good choices. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I really hope that you found this video helpful. We dyed 6 skeins of 75% Superwash Merino, 25% nylon sock yarn from 3 different companies, and I gave you some thoughts along the way. But as I said, I don't think there's really a wrong choice. It's just what is the right choice for you. If you're a retail customer, maybe KnitPicks is the best choice because you can buy 2 to 3 skeins of the yarn bases that you're interested in, and you don't need to make a large bulk purchase. But for bulk purchases, both Dyer Supplier and Wool2Dye4 offer wholesale options. I mean, KnitPicks has bulk options as well, but I think that the prices are ultimately better at Wool2Dye4 and Dyer Supplier if you're buying enough quantities of yarn. And now I want to just take a moment and talk about some of the choices that I make as a business owner. ChemKnits is my hobby, it is my business, it's all rolled into one. And my focus here is making these videos. The shop and the yarn that I sell is secondary. Yes, the shop helps fund a lot of the content that I create on these videos, but I make different choices since I am buying yarn for the videos versus planning out colorways for the shop, if that makes sense. And so for me, cost isn't the final factor. For me, it's accessibility and the ease with which one of you at home could get a skein of bare yarn to play around with color at home. And so that's the reason why I still use KnitPicks for most of the bare yarn in these videos. Now granted, I like the yarn too. If I didn't like the yarn, I would not be using it and I would not be promoting it. But that is definitely a reason why I still stick with them. Not to mention that I was a KnitPicks customer for many years before I started dyeing yarn. And I remember being really excited when I was like, oh, this bare yarn is in one of the same yarn bases that I knit with all the time. And so I knew that I was gonna like the feel of it. And that made me more comfortable going and purchasing that and starting there. And so, yeah, it's been my comfort zone for, gosh, I guess about a decade now. So anyway, that's just a little bit of a thought of some of the choices that I make and why I go certain directions. But as I said, I use yarn from all 3 companies depending on the project, and so I really do like all of it. I hope this video, which is pretty long and in depth, was helpful as a review because it is hard to tell when you're looking at a bunch of yarns as the same fiber content which one you should pick. I wanted to go fairly in depth and just compare them. If you'd like to see more side-by-side comparisons of different bare yarn lines in the future, let me know in the comments below. It might be a little harder to compare yarn bases or to accumulate them. It helped that I had a lot of these on hand already and then needed to place some orders, so it worked out. But I can definitely start planning out as I place orders for the future. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I love to dye yarn. I publish at least 2 videos every week on Tuesday and Friday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. I also do frequent unboxings and live streams, and we have a lot of fun. So make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and have your notifications, that little bell icon, turned on so you never miss a new video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I try my best to reply to them all in a timely manner. And while you're at it, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up if you found it helpful. And, you know, you could share it with your friends. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.